How are you doing? I know through this whole thing you are in a high-risk category, but you haven't been able to isolate yourself. On top of that, you've been watching Kentucky, the United States as a whole, kind of fall apart over the last few months, and everyone's looking to you for answers. How are you handling all of that?
Wear a mask, practice social distancing. The Senate, after going home like everybody did for a month or so in April, went back into session. We've been wearing masks, social distancing, and we've been able to work safely throughout the summer, going back to May the 1st. And I think Dr. Fauci put it best when he said, we're not going to shut the economy down again. There was a lot of price to be paid for that as well.
It was painful. You saw it here in Kentucky.
Not only that, but, you know, it delayed people's surgery because hospitals had bans on elective surgery. Suicides went up, overdoses went up, spouse abuse, child abuse. I mean, it created a whole different set of problems. We're not going to do that again. So we know we're not going to have a vaccine until at the earliest late this year or early next year. So what do? We wear a mask, practice social distancing, and help us get through this until we can put it finally in the rearview mirror. And I think we can work safely. Many of the states now are beginning to level off. We had a surge here, but I think it's leveling a bit, and hopefully will go down. And we have no choice. Everybody needs to be responsible not only for themselves, but for those around them.
Hope. I know that's something we all throw out there in this time, and I know in Murray, Kentucky, just yesterday, you mentioned you wanted to bring that hope. But since we've talked last at the beginning of August, to the public eye, it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of progress in negotiating another round of stimulus, and that really was a hope for a lot of people in July and August. What do you say to the people who needed that extra round of relief weeks, months ago?
Well, they certainly need it now because the plus-up of basic unemployment insurance expired. The popular PPP small loan program expired. Yes, I recommended that we do another round. Regretfully, as you indicated, I think the environment is more partisan than it was back in March and April. The partisanship and the passion has risen. And what I like to say to our Democratic friends and to everybody else, the coronavirus doesn't have a stake in this election. We need an additional boost, in my opinion, and I hope we'll still be able to get there. Although, as we're doing this interview, we're at a stalemate.
And how do you bridge that gap to get there? I mean, you're one of the main leaders in Washington. How do you play the part in bringing people together to that resolution?
I think we should do a very targeted approach. For example, the House bill at $3 trillion would have doubled what we already added to the national debt in March and April, doubled it. And it included things like tax cuts for high-income people in certain big states like New York and California. Really, that's unrelated to the coronavirus. Here's what we ought to do, in my opinion. Liability protection, so we don't have an epidemic of lawsuits on the heels of the pandemic, to protect hospitals, doctors, nurses, universities, K through 12, and businesses. Focus on kids in school. We had a big $100 billion plug in my proposal for education. Renewal of the small business loan program. 50,000 Kentucky small businesses access $5.2 billion in forgivable loans. But that program needs to be replenished. And, of course, the hospitals, I think, and all the healthcare providers need another slug, and we need another $1,200 check for low-income people who've been hit hard, particularly those in the hospitality field, restaurants, hotels, narrowly crafted to meet the problems that we have is what I recommend.
Evictions, utility shutoffs,
yeah.
That's something we're facing in September and October for many families, and states are trying to put a stopgap in place, but... Yeah,
the president tried to address that in one of his executive orders, but another way to deal with it would be a $1,200 check to low-income people would help them pay their rent. I mean, there are two ways to get at it, and I think all of this is a problem. I mean, take unemployment insurance, for example. the $600 federal addition to basic state unemployment insurance, candidly, was too much because it allowed many people to stay home and make more than they would if they went back to work. We've adjusted that to $300 or $400 added on to basic state unemployment insurance. That needs to be continued. The proposal the president did by executive order, which Governor Beshear has taken advantage of, will run out in about 5 weeks. So we really haven't solved the unemployment problem long enough. So there are a whole lot of reasons why we need to put the passions of the election behind us and get another deal.
Let's focus in on Kentucky a little bit more, specifically the coal industry. Now, it's crumbled over the last few decades. Some of the reason they say is that the strict mandates that were in place that this administration has rolled back in some regards, but we haven't seen the coal industry come back in the bluegrass. How do you either help it come back or replace it with jobs that are sustainable for Kentuckians, especially here in Western Kentucky?
Well, the first thing we have to do is help those who were displaced by all of this. And I was almost single-handedly responsible for both covering coal miners' health benefits and fixing their pension problem, so that the people who were displaced by the downturn in the coal industry are taken care of. There are all kinds of predictions about the future of coal, and many of the predictions have not been very good. So we have to adapt to a changed condition. Kentucky adapted to the loss of tobacco. It took a while. It took a tobacco buyout. It took trying a new crop like hemp. We all hope the coal industry will come back, but it's shaky. And the reason it needs to not be completely obliterated is because a significant percentage of the nation's power comes from coal-generated, coal-fired plants. And so I hope the slide is stopped, but it'd be hard to predict a bright future. I don't think that would be a candid assessment of the situation.
And turning to the November election, you've said it, Republicans are at a risk of losing control in the Senate. What kind of risks and downfall will that play if they don't secure it?
Well, the Senate is the firewall against a lot of really bad ideas. If the Democrats were able to take the entire government, here's what you'd have. D.C. statehood, that'd be 2 senators given to a place full of lobbyists and influence peddlers, offsetting Kentucky's 2 senators. Statehood for Puerto Rico as well. That's 4 new Democratic senators, fundamentally changing the competitive nature of the U.S. Senate for generations to come. They would also pack the courts. They would add seats to the Supreme Court, the circuit courts, the district courts, and fill them with judicial activists. And then they would turn to the economy and they would overregulate and overtax, as they always do when they have an opportunity to. None of that, in my view, would be good for America. If I'm still the majority leader, and by the way, my opponents, should she win, first vote would be to transfer the majority leader position from Kentucky to New York, making Chuck Schumer the leader of the Senate. A dramatic loss of influence for our state. That is, I think, a very strong argument for not changing the current representation we have in the United States Senate.
Lastly, Senator, I understand you have some passionate views about defunding the police.
It's a nutty idea to defund the police. And the whole notion that we're not smart enough to distinguish between peaceful protests, which are constitutionally protected and remain so, and violence and looting and just sort of random carnage is completely unacceptable. And I think the Democratic Party nationally is reluctant to stand up for the police. We need them. Most police officers are doing a tough job every day protecting all of us. And it's absolutely nutty to think that a solution to more violence is to defund the police department. When people are in trouble, they don't want to call a social worker. They want to call somebody who can help protect them. So I'm a strong defender of the police. I think overall, all across America, they do a good job. Have there been a few bad policemen? Yes, they have, and we've seen one on full display during the George Floyd murder.
Senator, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it.